Good afternoon. I think we better wait for like a few minutes until people start coming in the room. What do you think? Should I wait for a few more minutes? Yeah, it's. I can see them coming. I can see them coming. It's very optimistic of you. No. I've been there. I've been there before. I'm sorry. Yeah. Just 1 second, since nobody's here. Can we tell people to come in? They're still outside. Nobody's in the room. Thanks. I think it's the panel before us. They were bored, put it that way. This is a lively one. Please come in. That's my sales pitch, Sam. Hello. I think we're streamed live, and so probably I can begin. So. Okay, whomever is here, welcome to the 14th session of MEDays. U.S. foreign policy, paradigm shift, its global implications in a polarized world. And on January 20th, 2025, the U.S. has returned to its traditional, however, fundamentally recalibrated doctrine. President Trump revived the America First ethos. However, with a structured blend of economic coercion, transactional diplomacy, and selective engagement. We will be discussing these issues today, and we will try to unpack this paradigm shift. And for that objective, we have a great panel of experts. And the logistics, I would ask each member of the panel to speak 3 to 5 minutes, and then I would also urge them to engage with each others and with the audience. Feel free to interrupt if you disagree, please. And after 3 to 5 minutes, we all complete your brief interventions. I will open the floor to the audience, and we take Q&As, and I always find it interesting to engage the audience. And let me begin by asking Marissa Khurma to discuss whatever she picked on these paradigm shift to be her subject.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thanks for shedding light on this very important topic. Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me now? Excellent.
Now you can again thank Mohammed.
I will, thank you. Thank you again, Mohammed, and thanks to MEDays for highlighting this important topic. As you mentioned, America First is back. I think what was outlined in President Trump's inaugural address that sort of gave us a flavor of what the foreign policy will look like is this notion of peace through strength. And within the first few weeks, we already saw what that looked like for the second Trump administration. So the U.S. foreign policy toolbox was tackled in a way that other administrations had not. The U.S. foreign policy toolbox was always distinguished with the 3 Ds, diplomacy, development, and defense. And one of the first acts that essentially targeted one of these tools was when the United States Agency for Development was essentially completely dismantled, and then within a few months tucked into the State Department, and more than 80% of its programming completely eliminated. And so one important implication here is that the development D has been eliminated. You alluded to transactional diplomacy. We've seen some of that in his first term, but perhaps there's a doubling down on transactional diplomacy. But I would also say, redefining also diplomacy and the role of the State Department, because we also saw huge layoffs, over 1,000 people that were laid off from the State Department, and presidential envoys completely replacing career diplomats. Those people are trusted friends of President Trump that were essentially given important portfolios to handle, from Ukraine to the war in Gaza, as well as other transactions. I wanted to zoom into the development component, particularly with the Middle East and North Africa region, because I've done some work on this as a preliminary assessment. I think it's too early to tell what the implication is going to be across the board, but needless to say, billions of dollars have been completely dismantled from programming. Thousands of people have lost jobs, not just in the United States with the US agency, but amongst other organizations that have been benefiting from all of these different programs and projects, be it economic development projects or projects focused on women, youth, or infrastructure projects. And so we're going to see more adverse consequences as we move along, because this has created a tectonic shift in the international development community. Other agencies, UN agencies and other donors have had to also reassess their approach, perhaps recalibrate and divert resources elsewhere. And so many organizations on the ground, particularly in civil society, lost a lot of funding. And so once again, it's sort of America First means that America will not be taking a leadership position addressing some of these issues that basically tackled severe humanitarian crises or development challenges that the MENA region faced, which have always been linked to US national security interests. But that's completely thrown out of the window now, and as you mentioned, replaced by interest with this new mindset that fits with the America First sort of paradigm and supports whatever the president is trying to do, be it in Gaza, for example, or most recently in Syria. So I think we're going to see a lot more unravel in the MENA region, particularly in the development space. But I know from talking to many people who have run various projects that they are trying to re-strategize, that they want to come up with new ways. So that's the silver lining, perhaps, that they are trying to find new sources. But it's going to have to be a question that the wealthier countries in the region have to grapple with, because they cannot move forward with their modernization and economic grandiose plans if the rest of the region continues to be underdeveloped or struggling economically. And so they have to pitch in where the United States has pulled out.
Thank you. Before I ask Mike to give us his views on the subject, I have a quick question for you. Do you see any value to the Trump administration policy, which is replacing aid with trade? Instead of being dependent on US assistance, maybe it's about time you can get the people in the region, as you mentioned, or maybe instead of becoming totally dependent on American foreign assistance, that you improve your economy, get the regional players to chip in. So this notion of moving from aid to trade, do you see any value in it in the near future?
There is value to it if there aren't all of these tariffs that have been imposed. And I think that's, I guess, part of the coercive approach that this administration has been pursuing. It is going to force the region to look inwards and to take ownership and to move forward with necessary reforms that should have happened perhaps decades ago in order silver linings, but I think it's also and we can talk about this later, I'm sure it'll come up in the conversation, it also creates a vacuum in the short term for other great powers, particularly China and Russia, but most probably China because it's more involved economically, to enter that field. And so, you know, it is, the Middle East is a theater for great power competition. So when the United States retreats, other great powers will definitely step in.
Thank you. Mike, please.
Thank you, Moafik, and thanks to the Amadeus Institute for this wonderful conference. It's my first time in Morocco, and it's very exciting to be here. I discovered that Morocco is an ancient Berber word for land of really great cookies. I didn't realize how many cookies I was going to eat here, but I thank you for that too. I agree with just about everything Marissa said. I'd like to take a couple of step backs and just look at the foreign policy and the region with a much wider aperture. Because I think there are some big structural forces at work that are shaping everything that's going on. And the starting point, I think, is that we are in basically a bipolar system now, rather than a multipolar system. And it is United States versus China. But as Marissa said, there's lots of areas of vacuum that system doesn't fill every dimension of the system. And it's allowing a lot of middle powers to rise up as well. So within the context of China versus the United States, we have the rise of very significant middle powers such as Turkey, Azerbaijan, structural aspect of international politics. The Middle East, in the worldview of American leaders, is being downgraded somewhat. There are voices in the United States on the left and on the right who are saying that we should get out of the Middle East entirely. This is not going to happen, but they're going to be there as pressure groups on both sides, making very similar arguments. The progressives and Tucker Carlson, when it comes to the Middle East, are basically saying that in terms of policy vector, are saying the same things, and that's going to put pressure on any American leader to pull back. But we have vital interests in the Middle East, and we're going to remain involved there. President Trump's first foreign visit was to the Middle East. That should have been a clear signal to everyone. But the Middle East is also, we still have vital interests there. And the contest in the Middle East, first and foremost, is a hard power contest. Middle East is the cockpit of power politics. So the United States has to remain militarily involved, but it wants to invest less. That gives it only one choice, really, which is to work through allies more than it has in the past, militarily. And when you look at it from that point of view, there are only two allies of the United States in the Middle East that can really project power beyond their borders in any kind of sustained and significant way, and they are Turkey and Israel. So those are the main actors that the president has to work with. Now, so when he's looking at I say the president, any president, when they look at the globe, they're seeing China, Russia, Iran, pardon me, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea against the United States and its allies. And so in the Middle East, that's a contest between the United States and Iran. And President Trump decided basically to delegate the job of containing Iran to the Israelis primarily. And he followed the logic of that as far as he could. But then at a certain point, round about the attack on Qatar, by the Israelis, the region began to push back a bit and say, hey, hold on, I'm not sure we like that model too much. And now there's a kind of a rebalancing going on. But you'll see President Trump's inclination was to, when stabilizing Gaza, his first inclination was to put Turks on the ground in Gaza. I think the Israelis have pushed back against that very, very strongly. But you can see the logic working out here is that President Trump wants to pull America back. He wants to stabilize the region, and he wants to find a way to work with the Turks and the Israelis. I think where he's ending up is the job of the United States is in the big picture. Number one, to push back against the Iranians. Number two, to keep the Turks and the Israelis apart, to prevent their. His inclination is to bring them together and to try to broker some kind of marriage between the Turks and the Israelis. But the Turks and the Israelis don't like each other, if you listen to what they're saying. And they're liking each other less and less as every day goes on.
Because of Syria as well.
I think even much bigger than that. But I don't want to take up I realize I get an hour to talk here, but I don't want to take up the whole hour with that. But
okay, take advantage of your remaining 10 seconds.
Let's just say that they're hostile to each other, and so we're not going to be able to have a marriage. It's going to have to be an affair on the weekends. I think that's the way it's going to have to be.
Thank you, Mike. Before I ask Gina to give us her ideas on and views on the subject, quick question for you. You worked at the White House before, and
I worked there with Gina back in the 2005 to 7. We solved all the problems.
Sure, absolutely. How do you see this? The Trump's White House dealing with these issues? Don't you see it's unconventional? We don't see a State Department envoy. We see friends, relatives. He's dealing with like special envoys, but they're not coming from the U.S. institutions. How would you rate that?
You know, as Marissa said, that there is this. On Earth is being run by about 6 people, I'm not.
They're not all Washingtonian. I mean, they're coming from a different background. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you talk to, this has been great for my organization, the Hudson Institute, because we're Trump adjacent, and when foreigners come, they can't figure out how to plug into the government, so they come to us to ask us what's going on. And we may or may not know, but we pretend to know, and this helps us. This helps us enormously. But it is a feature, I think, and it will probably be a more or less permanent feature. Maybe they'll open it up a bit as time goes on, and they realize that there are some career bureaucrats that they can trust. Maybe not. But it's a kind of defining feature. This is. I don't think that American foreign policy has been run by such a small, tight-knit group like it is now, yeah.
Thank you very much. Gina Abercrombie, please. Winstanley.
Well, we've been very broad. The question is of interpreting our America First. I would argue that it's an imperfect definition of what America First means. Without the dependability of a clear and somewhat consistent policy, allies and adversaries are not able to anticipate and cooperate effectively. This may be useful for adversaries because they don't know what to expect. They can't count on certain things, so they may make them more cautious or not. We've seen in this foreign policy in this second Trump administration leadership that expresses one view on one day and something quite different the day after. You cannot depend on what's coming out of the White House or the State Department and that it's going to continue. Whether it is there must be a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and the president got one the second day after his inauguration, or very soon after, I've forgotten now, that he was able to impose, unlike presidents before him, and get both sides to adhere to it, and then he lost interest, and the Israeli side broke the ceasefire in March without any consequence that would have allowed it to hold and the process to get somewhere useful for the long term. We've seen it on Ukraine, where the president has alternatively blamed Russia and blamed Ukraine, and blamed Russia and blamed Ukraine, and supports Ukraine and supports Russia. And it is difficult for anyone to trust that there is going to be longevity and commitment from the US government on a particular policy. And this makes it difficult to put America first because nobody knows what that means in the long term. I think you're absolutely right about a small group of people running foreign policy, but not necessarily well. And there are wonderful examples of success, and yet the success being squandered immediately after. And again, we could turn to Gaza, where the president had a peace plan, got the United Nations to sign onto it, applauded by the Israelis, which makes clear it was decidedly one-sided, but in place. And yet, as everyone reads on a daily basis, there is no de facto ceasefire. Bombings continue. People are continuing to be killed. Aid is not flowing into the Gaza Strip as it was outlined in that peace plan. And so what indeed does that mean? There was success, and I would argue it's being squandered. There can be success in other policy announcements, but without predictability, not only a year from now, but a month from now as to what those tariffs, how do you make decisions long term, which businesses must do with such a mercurial foreign policy? My view is that this is not America first, because it's important for America to be trusted so that people remain allies. That transactional is insufficient for long term.
Gina, quick question before I ask Paul Salem to express his views. You don't see any value in the Trump administration approach not to rely on the foreign policy traditional establishment? I mean, for decades, people who would argue that President Trump is shaking the foundations, he is scoring, he's resolving issues. For decades, the US foreign policy establishment, people would say, managed crisis and conflicts, and recently in the Middle East, it was a bad management of crisis. Don't you see any value that what he's trying to do to circumvent and to try to bypass the career diplomats and all these long processes and that don't lead to any conclusion on any conflict? You don't see any value in his new approach?
Oh, I absolutely do, but there still has to be some consistency with the changes that you make. Listen, a broken clock is right twice a day. I can absolutely point to what I consider successes in this administration and applaud them. And certainly the ceasefires that the president has demanded, I would say clarity about Ukraine, that it is not a winnable war, is a reasonable position to take, but a certain consistency to it is lacking. And therefore, how much have we really moved forward? And I would argue not nearly sufficiently. And if you are using professionals, you've stated your policy, you make clear what you want to accomplish,
main objectives of the Trump, there is much more overlap than you might see in Europe, or that you might see in trade policy in general, or immigration policy, or other areas where there's a tremendous shift. And maybe that's why in the Middle East you saw a fair amount of cooperation in the transition between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. I would say the major departure between Trump and the Democrats came in his first term, when he pulled out of the signature achievement of the Obama administration, which was the JCPOA with Iran. But since then, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, or Mr. Trump, let's put it that way, because the administration is effectively one guy, aided by 5 or 6 people, but the decision is always his. On Iran, I think still his preference, and he's stated it many, many times, he wants to get to a deal. He said it in his first administration. That's what the Biden administration wanted to achieve too. On Israel, which is obviously always a big issue, especially in the last 2 years, both administrations were pretty blanket supporters of Israel, but at the same time wanting to try to end the war in Gaza, trying to get to a transition in Gaza to something else. Biden tried, Trump has tried, he achieved something in Sharm el-Sheikh, but it's falling apart. It doesn't seem to be moving, so there's similarity there. Both of them wanted to move from Gaza to the big prize in the region, which is try to get Saudi-Israeli talks going again, and to get to this great Saudi-American-Israeli deal, another, a breakthrough in the Abraham Accords group. Biden administration tried that. Trump administration still has that as a goal. And we can, comment about if that's going to happen or not. With Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and that really reflects U.S. interests. One is global energy markets still matter, and they're going to matter for the next 20, 30 years. They're still the main choke point for the Chinese economy. They get half their energy, so that's not anything the U.S. can walk away from. Energy transition, also the Gulf is going to be a major player. And both the Biden administration, it started in the Biden administration, but is really being clinched in the Trump administration, which is the tremendous rise and obvious importance of AI in the future of global geopolitics. And the U.S. realizing both under Biden and Trump that the U.S. doesn't have enough electricity, generation capacity to do enough AI, as well as other things. The Gulf has cheap energy, has cash, has money, and you saw the Trump administration lock in with a number of U.S. companies, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, in major deals to expand the future of US-led AI capacity in order to contain and compete with China. So that new relationship is something that is important for the future, 10, 20 years, 30 years down the road. So that relationship with the Gulf remains very, very important. I think where the Trump administration is now, unlike in other parts of the world, I think it's President Trump unusually, that is proposing regional order rather than disorder. He wants deals. He wants more Abraham Accords. He wants to end the wars in Gaza. He wants to find a way to normalize between Saudi and Israel, which is going to require concessions to the Palestinians. That will also open up potential for Syria and Lebanon, potential others to normalize. He wants a deal with Iran. He wants to do all of those things in his second term. So maybe unlike in Europe or other places, he's kind of the guy saying, let's build an integrated order, and is in a way being very reasonable in the Middle East. I would say the obstacles at this point are the current Israeli government and the current Iranian government, which are really not in that mood. So not so much of a paradigm shift in the traditional sense, but if he gets his way, we might have a paradigm shift in a positive sense.
Okay. Paul, before I ask Asha to also express her views, I have a quick question for you. You mentioned Lebanon and the possibility of the expansion of the Abraham Accords and what have you. Official Lebanon recently expressed its willingness to engage in peace negotiation, direct peace negotiation with Israel. Do you see that? Do you see that happening anytime soon, or the selective engagement of Washington? They don't think Lebanon is right now. It's ripe. And second, I cannot resist, but there were rumors that you're going to be heading the Lebanese delegation in case that happened.
Rumors, all rumors.
Reports. I'm sorry.
Well, the Lebanese government, two things, has expressed currently that it wants to engage in talks with Israel to arrive at a cessation of hostilities, which is different than a peace treaty. It wants to consolidate the agreement that again was reached during the Biden-Trump transition in November of last year. Both administrations cooperated to get this deal done in November, which was a cessation of hostilities. One can get into the details. That has unraveled, and today is the anniversary of 1 year. So the Lebanese government wants to go back and consolidate the original cessation of hostilities agreement, and wants to discuss a permanent, potentially a permanent cessation of hostilities.
But obviously the Israelis are not
Lebanon.
interested in this only. They want
Currently,
real...
they're not interested because they say Lebanon has not done its full job of disarming Hezbollah, which is true. We can, it's not time to get into it. But so Lebanon is expressing its willingness to basically discuss a permanent cessation of hostilities.
So what are we waiting for? An American mediation to get that
Yes,
together? And
currently
why is the White House reluctant not to engage? And
Well, when they go to speak with the Israelis, basically Prime Minister Netanyahu says, no, I'm not interested in talking with the government now. A, they haven't done their job, or they haven't done the complete job. On the issue of potential peace between Lebanon and Israel, the Lebanese official position is clear that Lebanon is ready for peace with Israel.
A little bit different, more broad in terms of the shift. First and foremost, I want to say, before I discuss the shift, is that we have yet to see a published national security strategy, which a lot of people like me in Washington are waiting for the national security strategy to come out and published by the White House. Or I was told that the national defense strategy will come out, but those are pretty much setting the priorities within the administration. What are their national security foreign policy priorities? And just based on what we learned from the first 100 days of President Trump, we've learned in terms of the prioritization is that the Western Hemisphere in homeland defense pretty much outperform other priorities, such as traditionally the Middle East. So just yesterday, we've seen that there's ongoing discussions about airstrikes in the Caribbean. We just saw President Trump conduct gunboat diplomacy in the Western Hemisphere. And then we have a lot going on in the CARICOM in terms of especially with Trinidad and Tobago, as far as how do we deal with this situation where we have a U.S. presidency that is in pursuit of aggressive policies with defense and diplomacy involving Maduro. So a lot of attention when it comes to the Western Hemisphere and homeland defense. And in fact, on to homeland defense, we're seeing a lot in terms of the ICE. I want to approach that first. And then, as far as second prioritization, I think we are still in pursuit of strategic competition, countering or competing against Russia and China. And you can see that play out in Ukraine, as well as China when it comes to, especially when it comes to making money involving tech and AI. China just recently mentioned that they want to pretty much dominate in the AI space by 2030. That was a huge announcement. And also integrating the rest of AI in their society by 2030. So we're seeing a lot of that play out, and also in the recent summit with ASEAN, where there is some sort of like minimal commitment to Taiwanese security, and also, you know, the traditional approach of maintaining our alliances with the ASEAN community. And the next, I would say, is the Middle East. The Middle East is just, you know, every new administration since Obama, there's been this intent to deprioritize the Middle East. It eats up too much of the oxygen, but it always makes its way up as being one of the top priorities. So the Gaza crisis is evidently that, and it will continue to be a top priority. And in fact, I think what drives it is the media, especially social media, which is really defining the narrative of what exactly is going on in terms of the outcomes of our policies. So just real quick, as far as a list of things that we learned from his first 100 days, is first, many people say that he was in, President Trump, in terms of foreign policy, was in pursuit of competitive authoritarianism, challenging the media, challenging our government institutions, and at the same time wanting to maintain primacy and offshore balancing. He's also in pursuit of expansionism policies, like looking into expanding into Greenland, right? And also looking at the Panama Canal. One said it before, but kind of somewhat relinquished all these different sets of, I have brought peace to different areas, India and Pakistan as well. So, and of course he was in pursuit of that as far as rushing to try to be in pursuit of the Nobel Peace Prize, but that did not work for him. And then last but not least, in terms of looking at global governments and multilateralism, you're going to see, what you've seen in the first 100 days is a set of divestment in terms of strengthening the Bretton Woods institutions, also looking into United Nations. You know, there's a lot of speculation that there's defunding the role of international institutions. And just want to end on terms of the implications of that. What our allies and partners are learning from this is that, okay, the administration is in pursuit of tough diplomacy towards our allies and partners, so we have to work around this. And you saw that. One example of that is the BRICS summit just recently. And then also too, with regards to United Nations, well, if you want to defund, we're going to turn to China and others to fund the United Nations. And in terms of the Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF, and oh my God, the World Trade Organization, underutilized when it comes to in pursuit of tariffs. Those organizations are getting beaten up, and then you have countries like Europe, regions like Europe that are trying to figure out how do we save the World Trade Organization, and not by us, you know, Americans who pretty much helped create it. So what you're seeing in terms of implications is our alliance system is going through a realignment. And last but not least, in terms of the implication, affordability crisis in the United States is huge. And what the American people want is that from this administration, whether it's through energy, public health, economics,
Asha, your time is up.
where they benefit from it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And we'll come back to the Q&A,
Yes.
but I
Okay.
think I want to leave some room for the Q&As from the audience. So, Professor Travis Atkins, the President and CEO of the U.S. African Foundation of Development.
Yes, sir, former president. Thank you. I have to tell you, I've spent 30 minutes sitting here in a more or less quiet outrage at what I am hearing, because we're having a kind of staid DC think tank conversation as if this is a normal time in America. And my consciousness would not allow me to sit in Africa when an administration is expressing hatred and disdain for Africans and and talk to you like that's not happening. To sit among Muslims when our president and his administration is expressing hatred and disdain for Muslims and Islam. To sit among people who might be wanting to immigrate to America and act as if we're not living in a time where our president and his administration is expressing xenophobia and hatred of immigrants, especially those coming from the region of Africa, especially from those coming from any country or region where the majority population is black and brown, to talk to you about macro geopolitical things as if black and brown people are not being disappeared off the streets of America, as if the language of autocracy is not being mainstreamed in our nation every day. And I believe that this is a shame to have a conversation like this as if those things are not happening. When we talk about America First, I think that that distinction is really one about globalist versus isolationist. And the isolationist perspective of America First is what you're seeing now. But those of us who do this for a living, which is all of my colleagues on this panel, and as our ambassador, Abercrombie-Winstanley, was saying, we know that even when we were in a globalist era wanting to engage in the world, still the notion of that was America First, right? All of these great and moral and altruistic things were great and moral and altruistic, but they also were enlightened self-interest, right? And that's not a dig on America, because that's what every nation is trying to do, is to pursue its own interests. But we shouldn't pretend that this is new in some ways, even though it is a particular time. So we could talk about a paradigm shift, but the fact of the matter is that our nation has not always engaged in its foreign policy in terms of diplomacy or development and defense. That is a relatively new paradigm. USA was created in the 1960s. I was born in the 1970s. I'm only 50 years old. Our nation will be 250 years old next year. So I think it's silly to suggest that something we started 60 years ago is the way that we have always operated. We know the history of our nation as it relates to the Africa region, as it relates to the Middle Eastern region. And what we're seeing now is a saying that they say sometimes in America about the quiet part being said out loud. So many of your worst critiques of the United States were against the rhetoric that we were promoting in our foreign policy, in our embassies, in our diplomacy. But as the son of the people of Africa brought to America to be the beast of burden and to have their labor extracted from them against their will, I come from a specific tradition. And that is a tradition where you don't ignore these kinds of things. You don't look over these kinds of things. You make a commitment to be critical of the thing that you love, right? Because this is what love is. Love is not telling somebody they're great when you see them going off of a cliff. Love is not telling somebody they're going forward if you really think they're moving backwards. And so I think there needs to be a huge wake-up call. And I think the time is out for going all over the world talking like this is business as usual. And I could see your eyes glazing over because we're talking to you like you don't see the news, like you can't see what's happening on television, like you don't know that this is not a regular time in our nation. And people should be ashamed to come somewhere speaking to the people for whom this administration is against and talk to them like it's just another Saturday.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate your honest comments, and I believe what you have mentioned deserves not a panel, but probably a whole conference. And thank you again. But what we're trying to do is trying to explain what's going on, not to advocate or defend or promote. So that's probably the task the organizers have gave me to do on this panel. So thank you very much for.
I think I did explain what was going on.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now I ask Professor Henri Barkey to express his views.
Thank you. Everything that could be said has been said, but not with my accent, so please bear with me. Look, we are at the beginning of a major change in the international system. What I will try to argue is that we don't know whether or not this is a permanent change or is there's going to be a backlash. But we are clearly abandoning the liberal hegemonic order that's ran the world essentially since the end of World War II. It was not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we know that very well. But it did offer certain rules. It did offer a certain amount of predictability. It actually did also offer a great deal of benefits to a large chunk of the world population. It may have benefited one part of the world more than another, but when you look at what has happened, especially in the last 20 to 30 years, a great number of people have improved their lifestyles that are in much better shape than they used to be. But this was a system that created this. But now we are in a transition. What I don't know is what this transition is going to come up with. But what we do know is that that element of predictability that I mentioned, that the liberal international order provided, has gone away. And choices that are being made, especially because the United States is the single most important country at the moment economically, on a country, then changes them. And then, just to give you one particular example, which was really very absurd, is that at one point, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, he decided to impose tariffs on Canada. Why? Because a Canadian province, not the Canadian federal government, a Canadian province ran a political ad that quoted Ronald Reagan and what Ronald Reagan's, of course Ronald Reagan was not criticizing Trump, but the implication of what Ronald Reagan was saying was critical of Trump. So because of one ad, suddenly Canada was subjected to a 10% tariff. So what I'm trying to say is that we have a great deal of unpredictability. So where is this going? I suggest that there are 2 possibilities. One is the creation or the emergence, if you want, of an international authoritarian compact, if you want to call it, use exactly the word I want to use, an authoritarian international. Right? An authoritarian international where you have leaders such as Putin, Xi, Erdogan, Orban, you know, there's a whole bunch of others, right, who are essentially in line with Trump's thinking. They actually share very little in terms of values or common interests, except that they probably have the same enemies, the free press, the opponents at home, and so on and so forth. But they can work together and create a system that functions economically with tariffs, competition, spheres of influence, etc. That's one possible scenario. The other scenario, which is to me in some ways even more dangerous, is one that will end up in chaos. Look, the international political economy is actually quite a delicate system. Look around the world today, things, as I said, are looking pretty well. The American economy, despite the unpredictability of Trump, is doing fairly well. The stock market is booming. There's an AI surge, which people assume will carry the economy along. However, we have seen in the last 20 to 30 years, suddenly unexpected crises. Right? Remember the debt crisis. Remember the European crisis of 2008. Remember the American banking crisis. What do these do? They tend to hit the economy, especially the United States economy, suddenly and very, very violently, leading to huge unemployment, huge dislocations, and periods of uncertainty. So what happens if, and these are unpredictable, you don't know when you wake up one morning and suddenly you realize that there's a crisis. How did it come about? Nobody really knows. I mean, but although the signs were all there, and here one can argue, and I'm not going to go into details, there are many, many signs that there are imperfections in problems that are developing in the American and the global economy that can blow up in our faces. Then what will happen? And that's the problem. That's the crisis. We cannot predict what the next steps will be, and it's very, very difficult to get out of that. So when you have a chaotic situation like that, when you have a crisis like that, there always is a backlash. Right? Now, the American political system still
Final thoughts, Henry, please.
Yep.
Thanks.
Functions in a way in which every 4 years we have elections. So we have 3 more years of this unpredictability, right? When we don't know what will happen. So we'll see.
Thank you, Henri. I have a quick question for you before we open the floor to Q&As. As you know, the President Trump may not, probably he will not attend the G20 summit. And I heard today that even Secretary Rubio will not. So is strategic pragmatism and selective engagement, are they enough to maintain American leadership?
But American leadership, in his mind, I mean, your view of American leadership and my view of American leadership differs significantly from what he thinks American leadership is. American leadership for him is essentially getting the whip out and using it and thinks that works. He doesn't understand that actually undermines American leadership. But it's impossible to make that point to him. Whether he goes, he doesn't go. Maybe it's actually better if he doesn't go.
That's a good one. Anyone wants to make any quick comment, anything you disagree? But let's, please, Aisha, make it so
I'll
quick
just
because
keep
I
it
want
quick.
to open the floor to Q&As.
Yeah, no, just 20 seconds. Well, you know, coming from, as a foundational Black American, thank you, Travis, for making that point, but I'm definitely, in terms of my points, putting out there a non-think tank traditional view. I underscored homeland defense in terms of tough immigration policies in the Western Hemisphere, as far as the Caribbean is right now a hot spot.
Thank you.
That was not necessarily mentioned, and that was underscored, and it ties into the diaspora and the Black folks in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Now I want to open the floor to whomever has a question, but please, a question. You state your name, who do you want the question to be addressed by whom on the panel, and please make it brief and quick. Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Vasif Hüseyinov from Azerbaijan. My question is to all panelists about the ongoing peace negotiations on Ukraine. According to some reports, the United States is going to agree with the territorial transfer. It is something observed with a great concern in the post-Soviet countries because it may set a very dangerous precedent for the future of the region. My question is why the United States is taking such a step. I understand that President Trump is trying to reach peace on Ukraine, but I believe that it shouldn't come at the cost of international law.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mike, do you want to take that one?
Thanks. We'll start with why President Trump is doing it. President Trump, I think we have to take him at his word. He said over and over again that this is Joe Biden's war, the Gaza war is Joe Biden's war. He doesn't want these wars to dominate the foreign policy of his administration, and he wants to shut them down as quickly as possible. I don't agree with the method that he's adopted now, and in particular, especially putting pressure on Ukraine to give up territory that Russia can't take by force of arms. But I think that what I said earlier is the frame in which to understand all this. The emphasis, the focus is China. They don't want time and resources to be devoted to issues other than China. I agree with you that, especially if you're looking at it from the point of view of the South Caucasus, the implications for the South Caucasus are not positive. The implications for what he's trying to do in the South Caucasus with the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace are not good, because this is in the short term, this is strengthening Russia. But the general issue here is that there's a contest over, and I think this is the lesson for everybody. We're no longer in an effort to spread the liberal international order around the world. We're in a power political contest between the United States and China, and the center of gravity of that contest is Eurasia. And countries like Azerbaijan, Turkey, Israel, that have their own independent military capabilities are going to be tremendously advantaged in that new order, as is, by the way, Morocco, because the Middle East and North Africa are part of that global, are part of that Eurasian contest, and the United States is going to find Morocco to be its most loyal, dependable, capable partner in North Africa, in the southern flank of Europe, and into Africa.
But Mike, I have a quick question for you, since I don't see a lot of raised hands for questions. Maybe they are all persuaded, or they disagree, they don't know where to start. So anybody wants to, until then I have a
total agreement with
total agreement. I have a quick question for you. You said the Middle East has been downgraded in Washington recently. However,
I'm sorry, who's been downgraded?
the Middle East is downgraded, not.
Yeah.
However, yet the President Trump visited the Middle East twice so far in 9 months. No, but my question is, don't you think it's the approach to the Middle East is different right now? It's not a foreign policy adventure. It's not a luxury. However, it's tied to the America First agenda. You go to 3 Gulf states to get money, because stability in the Middle East right now means trade, means business. It means serving the America First agenda of the president. So he's still interested in the Middle East, but the approach of how you see the Middle East, it's not a conflict. It's a place where you can go, and I would like you to quickly comment on that.
The word, when I use the word downgraded, I think that was probably not the best choice of words, because the issue is this, that round about 2017, and I'm picking that number out of the air, there occurred a revolution in American foreign policy that nobody noticed, and that is that the senior military leaders in the United States started to realize that if there was a war between the United States and China over Taiwan, the United States might lose that war. And that has, since the end of the Cold War until that date, the United States assumed that it could win any war anywhere in the world that it chose to get into. Now, it might not want to pay the price it would take in order to win, but if it decided it wanted to win, it would win. And now they realize we might actually lose. Even if we want to win and we put all of our resources that we have available into the struggle, we might lose that. And that is the revolution that is continuing to reverberate. And there are lots of Trumpian specific elements of the way he's approaching everything now, the current diplomacy toward Ukraine and so on. But that is the revolution that is working itself out.
Great, thank you. With the remaining 5 minutes that we have for this panel, I'm going to ask each panelist to conclude with a 1 minute, and I want to start with Dr. Salim because he expressed interest.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I mean, I was in the Arab world during the Arab Spring, and our hope was that the Middle East countries would become more like the US, democratic, liberal, and so on. And I was joking with Mike when we were coming in. I now live in Beirut, and unfortunately I see the US becoming more like the Middle East, anti-democratic, illiberal, sectarian, ethnic hostility, ideological extremism, and it's horrible what's happening in the US, and I think we all agree on that. But I will also say US foreign policy in the Middle East was never pretty. The foreign policy is not uglier now than it has been for the last 50, 60 years, maybe with the exception of what Marissa mentioned, the generous development aid which helped millions of people, but blanket support for Israel in colonizing Palestinian land, invading Iraq on false premise. I mean, it's not suddenly bad. And a couple of other thoughts on the paradigm shift. I do want to mention two things. I think after these 2 years of war and what's happened, the position of Israel in the US is dramatically shifting over time. Israel has already lost the Democratic Party, I think, for the foreseeable future, and it's losing parts of the Republican Party. It's on and off losing President Trump, and I think that's potentially a very serious paradigm shift. Over the last 60 years, Israel has managed US Middle East policy. I think they're losing that. A second paradigm shift is what President Trump announced in the intention to sell F-35s to Saudi Arabia. And this could potentially, this indicates his leaning towards the Gulf and Saudi Arabia. But, F-35s, where Israel previously had kind of a monopoly and a huge edge militarily, it might indicate that at least this administration is no longer looking at the region as Israel is top and central and everybody else is marginal. And finally, on the paradigm shift that I mentioned that links to the future, the region, particularly, I would say the Gulf, used to be traditionally raw materials and traditional third world country stuff. Give us your oil. But now if they become partners in technology, both in the Gulf and here Israel also is a partner in technology. So the Middle East is no longer necessary. That's a paradigm shift in how the global economy and the US economy deals with the region.
Thank you very much. Now I want to hear final thoughts of each one of you. So let me start by Marissa, please, and then we move forward.
A few thoughts to add. I think we've always looked at global perceptions of the United States. I think that how this, foreign policy, not foreign policy shift, but this paradigm shift with the changes that we've seen with this Trump administration has perhaps made it worse, particularly in the MENA region. But it does go back to the traditional prisms through which most public opinion sees the United States, which is support for Israel, particularly in the last 2 years with the war in Gaza. But it's also the America First, tough immigration, tough visa policies that is turning people away. So ownership, but they don't want to choose the United States as a place for them to study. Yes, they consume Americana, but they do not want to be in America for their education anymore, because there's a principled position. First of all, they see the United States as completely complicit in the suffering and atrocities in Gaza, and of course there is the fear of losing their status, their visas, because of their views. So there's so many aspects to public opinion in the region, particularly with the youth, and I see many young people here. Perhaps we will hear more from them as we network later. But going back to this generation, they still have inherited the same challenges in the MENA region.
Thank you, Marissa. Okay. Our time is up, but I want to ask the organizers to give me 5 extra minutes because we started late. So please, Mike, your final thoughts.
I want to disagree with Paul, if I may. Paul, will you permit me to disagree with you? But not in order to disagree with Paul, but to...
You can disagree at the end of the panel,
just to make a point. Paul said the United States is turning against Israel on the left and on the right. It's true, but it's not true, I think. And here's a thought for you. On just one factor, Israel is a cyber superpower. There are 5 cyber superpowers in the world: the United States, China, Russia, Britain, and Israel. Not Estonia. Estonia is not yet. And are we going to push? Are we going to abandon Israel and push it into China's orbit when the contest over global AI is going to be one of the major factors determining who? There is this other factor, this contest going on globally, which really has very little to do, or it's being determined by factors that have very little to do with our fight with ourselves domestically. Now, our domestic fight is going to influence that global fight, but it has a logic all of its own, and I would follow that logic. It's very good for Morocco.
Thank you. Thank you. Gina, please, quickly.
Yes. You know, upheaval and change is what we are in the midst of, and it always has an opportunity to be positive or very negative. I would argue that where we are now and what the United States is enhancing, we didn't begin it, but we are enhancing it. Authoritarianism has been tossed around, xenophobia, racism, et cetera, that what the big loser is international law, are the institutions that were put in place to try and protect the weak, to move us away from might makes right, however imperfectly that it has been interpreted over the years, that we are ripping away all of those things now, and who can gainsay, who can complain about genocide in the Gaza Strip, or war crimes in Ukraine or Sudan, which we have not talked about as far as I know so far, when the powers that be are embracing it, not apologizing for it, and boldly going forward. We used to at least apologize for it or try and do it
Thank you, Gina.
quietly.
Thank you. I'm in a generous mode today, so I'm going to convey my minute of my final remarks to you, Paul, if you want to reply to what...
No, I had my last thoughts. I also agree with Michael's disagreement with me in the sense that, you know, definitely particularly the Israelist government is really right-wing. The position of Israel among young people, democratic, and you see in the polling, among some in the Republican Party, it's changing, it's shifting. It obviously doesn't mean U.S. is going to walk away from Israel, but it's something that I hadn't seen.
Example is that is Zoran Mundani, who just recently met with President Trump. They pretty much said the affordability crisis is going to be the priority. So I think President Trump is going to utilize foreign policy tools to address that issue, whether it's looking at working with the Saudis in terms of energy diplomacy, looking at the trade situation where he's looking at sending out stimulus checks all of a sudden, and all other implications, other issues as well. But I think the affordability crisis is definitely going to be the factor that's going to shape the behavior in terms of foreign policy. Thank
Professor Atkins, please.
Yes, I would just close by aligning myself with something that Marissa was sharing. Sorry, thank you. I was just going to align myself with something that Marissa was sharing in her opening remarks, which is about this being a time for internal reflection, for looking within, which of course is really the impetus of the Southern Forum, that you don't necessarily have reliable partners in the West at this time, which is a point that our ambassador was also making, and that if you have an over-reliance on people who could take you or leave you, the danger of that is that at some point you could be taken or you could be left.
Thank you. Henri, please.
Thank you. Look, Trump is a product of changes that took place in the last 30 years. Clearly, certain things were not working well, and that's why we ended up with Trump, not once, twice. However, there's also some benefit to having Trump now, in the sense that it is also going to create a backlash. It's going to force people to rethink things. We're already seeing that backlash when you look at the midterm elections in Virginia and New Jersey recently. We have elections coming up again. And if there is a serious backlash in the 2026 midterm elections, then you will see that, in a way, maybe Trump's emergence was a good thing because it forced us to rethink and reorganize ourselves.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for attending this session, and I would like to thank our panelists for their views. And in the age of misinformation and deep fake and AI, if you are confused, it means you are normal. So thank you for coming.
And thank you.